In the Museo Egizio in Turin, on the second floor, behind climate-controlled glass, sits a document most visitors spend less than 30 seconds reading before they move on. It is smaller than you would expect, the kind of object a person could carry in both hands. The surface is papyrus, the ink faded from deep black to the color of rust, but the lines of hieratic script remain legible. Scholars have been reading this document for 200 years. They understand every word of it. The document is the Turin King List. It was assembled during the reign of Ramesses II, around 1280 BCE, by scribes working in the same tradition that produced the great administrative records of the New Kingdom. Egyptologists use it as a primary chronological anchor for the entire span of pharaonic history. It is an administrative document, the kind of record produced by people whose professional identity was built around exactness. Every ruler in the list receives a name. Every reign receives a length. The scribal hand is the same formal script used for state correspondence, census records, and official decrees. This is not a devotional text. It is a ledger of power. What the papyrus records at its opening, before Narmer, before the unification, before what we formally identify as Egypt, is 5 kings, 5 rulers listed by name, with reign lengths assigned in years and notations about what each one accomplished. 5 kings who governed this land before the pharaonic line began, and the scribes who listed them wrote their entries in exactly the same format, the same grammar, the same scribal conventions they used for Ramesses himself. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The Turin papyrus came to Europe through Bernardino Drovetti, an antiquities dealer active during the era of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, and was eventually transferred to the King of Sardinia. It arrived already damaged, portions were mishandled before scholars recognized what they held, and fragments were lost before any complete inventory could be made. The document now sits under catalog designation CAT, 1874 in the Museo Egizio, and its text, including the predynastic columns that open it, has been published, translated, and argued over across 2 centuries of scholarly attention. The difficulty has never been reading the script. The difficulty has always been with what the script says. The Turin King List is not alone in recording a predynastic sequence. The Palermo Stone, a 5th dynasty basalt stele dating to roughly 2400 BCE and now split between museums in Palermo, Cairo, and London, carries the same structural feature, a section listing rulers before the historical pharaohs, written in the same administrative language as the historical entries that follow. The Egyptian priest Manetho, writing in Greek during the Ptolemaic period around 280 BCE, compiled a history of Egypt called the Aegyptiaca. The original is lost, but substantial passages survive in quotations preserved in the works of Josephus and Eusebius centuries later. Manetho's account describes 3 full dynasties of divine rulers before the first historical pharaoh. He assigns them reign lengths in the thousands of years and names the major figures in the sequence with the same matter-of-fact tone he uses for the historical pharaohs. 3 independent sources, produced in different centuries, written in different languages, converging on the same predynastic rulers in the same sequence. Before going further, this is a channel about the questions the ancient world has not fully answered. Some of what follows is solidly documented. Some of it is genuinely disputed among specialists. Some of it moves into interpretation, and when it does, I will say so. The point is not to hand you a verdict. It is to show you what the texts actually record and let you decide what you think it means. The first king in the predynastic sequence, named in the Turin list and corroborated by Manetho, is Ptah. Manetho records the name in Greek as Hephaestus and assigns a reign of 9,000 years. In the Egyptian tradition, Ptah is the craftsman god, the patron of stonemasons, architects, and those who work with precise measurement. The pyramid texts, the oldest surviving corpus of religious writing in human history, carved into the burial chambers at Saqqara, starting around 2400 BCE, invoke Ptah repeatedly in specific physical terms. The Memphis Theology, preserved on the Shabaka stone in the British Museum, a document that claims to copy from an older papyrus, describes Ptah as the force through which the physical world was given form. He conceived the structures of the world, he spoke them, and they came into being. The verb constructions in both sources are past tense and active. Not eternal truths about a mythological principle, but completed actions performed at a definite point in time by a specific agent. What the Turin Papyrus's entry for Ptah carries, in the portion that survived the papyrus's difficult journey into European hands, is a scribal determinative worth pausing on. Egyptian hieroglyphic and hieratic writing used small classifying signs, called determinatives, to indicate the category a word belongs to. Divine mythological abstractions carry one type. Administrative titles and rulers who held specific offices carry another. In the predynastic entries of the Turin King List, including Ptah's entry, the scribes used the ruling office determinative, the sign that elsewhere marks pharaohs, regional governors, and administrative title holders. They did not classify these kings as symbolic representations of cosmic forces. They classified them as the occupants of a position. What ended Ptah's reign is not fully recoverable from the surviving fragment, but the Palermo Stone and Manetho converge on the same transition. Ptah's time closed, and Ra took the throne. The passage from one to the next is recorded without ceremony in both sources. One ruled, one stopped, the next began. Ra is the second king in the sequence. Manetho assigns a reign in the range of 1,000 years, though the surviving copies of his text vary slightly. In the Egyptian tradition, Ra is the ruler of the ordered, visible world, the movement of the sun, the calibrated cycles of day and night, the governing principle of measurement that made organized agriculture possible. The Heliopolitan cosmology, which shaped the theological framework underlying the Old and New Kingdom religious traditions, places Ra's reign as the era during which the structures Ptah built were governed and maintained. Where Ptah was the craftsman of the world's physical form, Ra was its administrator, the entity whose presence kept the cycles running and the order holding. What ended Ra's direct reign is preserved in a text unlike anything else in the Egyptian corpus for its narrative specificity. The Book of the Heavenly Cow is found in several New Kingdom royal tombs, most completely in the burial chamber of Seti I in the Valley of Kings, and in the tomb of Ramesses II. The text records Ra's withdrawal from direct, physical rule in something close to narrative form. It describes a gradual deterioration in the relationship between Ra and the people under his governance, a growing remoteness, a departure from the order he had established. Ra sends his eye as an instrument of correction. He relents before the correction runs its full course. And then, rather than continuing to rule directly, he makes a choice. He withdraws. He does not die. He is not overthrown by a rival. He ascends to a position from which he continues to govern the cycles of the sky, but no longer walks among the people he once ruled. The verb form the Book of the Heavenly Cow uses for this transition is the same form that appears in administrative records when describing a senior official who removes himself from a post by choice, as distinct from one who is dismissed or replaced. The scribes who wrote it understood those as separate categories and wrote accordingly. Ra's removal from his kingship was volitional. It was a response to a change in the world, and it was documented in a text the royal households of the New Kingdom considered significant enough to carve into the walls of their tombs. The third section of the predynastic record covers a period that survives only in fragments in the Turin Papyrus, but that the Palermo Stone and Manetho both reference: the reigns of Shu and Geb, the two generations bridging Ra and Osiris. Shu governed air and the space between earth and sky. Geb governed the earth itself. In the Egyptian cosmological framework, these are Ra's immediate successors, the principles that gave the physical world its structure after its administrator stepped back. The Palermo Stone treats their reigns in the same analytic format as the surrounding entries. Reign years noted, events summarized in the compressed language of official record. Neither Shu nor Geb is described in language that signals myth. They are entries in a list. What the convergent sources agree on is that Geb's reign ended with a transfer of power to the figure whose time in the predynastic sequence is by far the most thoroughly attested in Egyptian writing. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more stories like this one. Osiris is the fourth king, and the documentation surrounding his reign operates at a different scale than anything in the sequence before him. The story of Osiris, his rule, his murder by his brother Set, his resurrection, and the succession conflict that defined what came after, runs across more than 2,000 years of continuous Egyptian textual evidence. The pyramid texts cite it from around 2400 BCE. The coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom expand and develop it. The Book of the Dead carries it through the late period. The temple reliefs at Abydos, at Edfu, at Dendera record portions of it in carved stone. No other predynastic figure carries this density of attestation across this span of time, and the sheer consistency of the core account across sources separated by centuries is worth noting on its own. What the Turin King List and the Palermo Stone record is not the mythology of Osiris but the administrative fact of a reign. Manetho's account assigns him a period of rule during which the text records, in its dry administrative shorthand, that he established law, organized agriculture, and set the ritual structures that made communal life possible. The verb constructions the pyramid texts use for these accomplishments are the same constructions used in the historical records for pharaonic achievement: built the irrigation channels, set the measuring rods, named the administrative divisions of the land. These are the verbs of record-keeping, not the language of praise. What ended Osiris's reign is the only pre-dynastic removal in the sequence involving an explicit account of violent overthrow. Set, his brother, the god of storm, disruption, and the unordered desert, killed him. The specific details of the killing vary across different versions of the account recorded at different periods, but the core event is consistent in every source that touches it. Osiris was murdered, the throne was seized, and the lineage of orderly succession was broken by force. The pyramid texts are unambiguous on this. The murder is not softened or framed as a transition, it is described as the rupture it was. What makes this removal significant beyond the mythology is what the pyramid texts build on top of it. Every pharaoh who came after Osiris was, in the ritual logic of the coronation, Horus, the heir reclaiming what had been stolen. The murder of Osiris is the event the entire institutional structure of the pharaoh explains itself by reference to. The double crown, the succession ritual, the constant scribal framing of kingship as the maintenance of order against chaos, all of it traces back to a broken succession that, according to the scribes who produced these records, happened before history as they formally measured it began. They did not treat this as mythology at the foundation of a tradition. They treated it as the foundational event that made the tradition necessary. The fifth and final pre-dynastic ruler presents a different kind of textual problem than the earlier four. After the prolonged conflict between Horus, the legitimate heir, and Set, the usurper, described across multiple Egyptian sources as a legal and cosmic contest of substantial duration, Horus was formally confirmed as the rightful king. The contendings of Horus and Set, preserved in the Chester Beatty papyrus from the 19th dynasty, records this conflict in considerable detail. Horus's direct reign followed the confirmation. But what the Turin King List devotes substantial attention to is the period that came after his direct rule, the time referred to in Egyptian sources as the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus. The Shemsu-Hor appear in the Turin papyrus as a collective succession rather than a sequence of individually named rulers. The list records them as a class of rulers covering a period counted across several hundred years, arranged in the same administrative format as the earlier divine kings and the later historical pharaohs. They function as an intermediary order, a sequence of rule that stands between the time of the 5 divine kings and the time of the historical pharaonic line. The Palermo Stone corroborates their existence in the same administrative register. Manetho's account includes them. 3 independent sources, in consistent agreement, place them in the same position in the same sequence. What ended the Shemsu-Hor is the only pre-dynastic transition that the archaeological record can approach directly. Around 3100 BCE, a consolidation of administrative and political authority in the Nile Valley left physical evidence. The Narmer Palette, which records the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt in carved relief. The seal impressions from the royal tomb complex at Abydos. The early monumental architecture at Hierakonpolis. The Turin King List marks this transition with a visible boundary in the papyrus itself. The pre-dynastic columns end. The historical columns begin. The scribes drew that line themselves, and they knew exactly what they were dividing. What they did not change was their scribal conventions on either side of it. The grammar is consistent across that line. The determinatives are consistent. The record-keeping format is consistent. These scribes produced both administrative records and devotional texts. The Book of the Dead, compiled in the same tradition during the same period, uses a recognizably different register. different verb forms, different determinatives, different structural conventions, because it serves a different purpose. The King List is a list of rulers. The Book of the Dead is ritual instruction for the dead. The scribes who worked in both forms understood that difference and applied it with care. What a reader does not find in the Turin papyrus, as it crosses from the predynastic into the historical columns, is a shift in scribal register. The language on both sides is administrative. The standard of documentation is the same. The list does not signal through its own form that one side of the line is history and the other is story. The geological record of the Nile Valley offers a frame worth noting here, without pressing it further than the evidence allows. The African Humid Period, a sustained climatic phase that brought monsoon rainfall to what is now the Sahara, ended between roughly 5500 and 3500 BCE. The transition from a wet, habitable North Africa to the desert conditions that now define the region was not uniform, and archaeological surveys of Neolithic settlement sites in the Libyan and Egyptian desert document population collapse and large-scale eastward movement during this period. The acceleration of social complexity in the Nile Valley follows immediately. Communities consolidated along the river under the pressure of a world that was becoming uninhabitable where they had previously lived. Whatever shaped the 5 predynastic reigns into the form the Turin papyrus preserves, historical memory encoded in divine personification, actual events given mythological structure over millennia of retelling, or something harder to categorize cleanly. The span of time those reigns cover is the same span during which the physical world of northeastern Africa underwent one of the most significant transformations of the last 10,000 years. The pyramid texts give the predynastic kings a quality the later royal records no longer carry. They are present, they are addressable. The spells carved into the Saqqara chambers are written as direct communications to entities the scribes believed could hear them. Ptah is addressed. Ra is addressed. Osiris is addressed repeatedly, in the transactional language of a legal petition rather than the distant reverence of a prayer aimed at something unreachable. The 5 kings are not remote mythological figures in these texts. In the understanding of the scribes who produced the pyramid texts, they were available to be spoken to. The Turin papyrus is in Turin, Cat, 1874, its predynastic columns still bearing the damage from their early mishandling. The Palermo Stone sits in 3 pieces across 3 countries. The pyramid texts are still on the walls at Saqqara, legible to anyone who stands in the chamber and holds a light to them. None of this material is restricted or suppressed. The texts are translated. The scholarship is published. The 5 kings are named in sources anyone can consult. What remains open is what the scribal format of the Turin King List asks of the person reading it. The 5 predynastic rulers, Ptah, Ra, Osiris, Horus, and the collective Shemsu-Hor who bridged the divine and the historical, are recorded in administrative language by scribes whose professional training made them precise about the distinction between record and devotion. Each removal is noted. The transition from Ptah to Ra, Ra's withdrawal described in its own separate text with its own verb tense, the violent break of Osiris's murder, the confirmation of Horus after a prolonged conflict, and the slow dissolution of the Shemsu-Hor into a historical moment that left physical evidence in stone and clay. The sequence has its own internal logic. The removals are not identical. Each one follows from the nature of the king it ends. Each one, in its own way, was considered significant enough to preserve, and preservation, for the scribes of the New Kingdom, was an act of intention, not accident, not convention, but a choice to record something for the people who came after, in the most reliable form the scribes knew how to produce. The scribes who compiled the Turin King List drew the line between what came before and what followed. They wrote both sides in the same hand. That line, in a papyrus that has been in Turin for 2 centuries, is where you want to keep looking. They drew it. They knew what it divided. And they chose, knowing that, to write the 5 kings as if the line barely changed anything at all. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.